take a shot now. The day is so feckin' gorgeous. I love it when we get these sort of
it's
January
absolutely
days.
magnificent, isn't it?
I was thinking on the way in now,
Yeah.
I spoke to you back in 2002 for Borstal Boy.
Yeah.
How have you been keeping? Are you keeping well?
Yeah. Good.
I'm just thinking that time flies.
Yeah, I know.
We both look beautiful still, which is great. But
a lot of things have happened since 2002 in my life.
well,
If you want me to talk about it, I certainly will.
Well, that's the great thing about yourself and about Jim and about your own son with the runners and with the Jim's kids and all that. That ability to be able to, kind of capture the moment, which is what art is about. It's capturing moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that sort of, I don't know if that's if the main kick is a kind of a therapeutic thing for you, whether it's the joy of other people connecting. What is the motivation?
I think it's openness to start off with. We were brought up. My father was extremely open and inclusive, a great community man, wanted everybody to be involved, the whole parish, had that great sense about him. I mean, the story I always tell about him is that when we were kids, where we lived, the parish where we lived, St. Lawrence O'Toole's parish, it was divided between the people in the flats in Sheridan Street and the people who lived in the houses, the posh houses on the Savile Place side of the parish. And the two sides of the parish never intermingled. I mean, the people in Sheridan Street, they knelt on one side of the church and we knelt on the other side. They had their own priests who ministered to them, and those priests never came over to the other side. So the parish was just completely divided, except my father insisted that we play in the playground in Sheridan Street. So we were the only family from the houses side of it who went up there. And by the age of 10, I was the captain of Sheridan United. I was mad about football. I was absolutely nuts about soccer. All I ever wanted to be was a soccer player who played for Manchester United. And I was actually very good, and I got a bit of a trial, and there were scouts came around to the house. I remember a man called Billy Bean, a famous Manchester United scout, came down to the house and told my dad I had talent and all that kind of stuff. It was the first time I ever became aware of the show business. And my dad was thrilled. He was absolutely thrilled. And then I did a bit of boxing, and a kid from Sheridan Street who was regarded as a really tough kid. His name was Hardhead. His nickname was Hardhead because he used to go in and loaf people. Hardhead Bourne. He took me on one day, and I bet the living daylights out of him. And his parents came around that night and they were fucking shouting at the door, "Your son did our son in. He hammered him, he gave him an uppercut, he did this." And I'll always remember my father's response. He came down to the kitchen and he looked at me and said, "Son, don't ever do that again." And then he winked at me. As if to say, "You did exactly the right thing, son." And ever since then, I've always had that thing of standing up to bullies.
Right.
I'm not afraid of people. I've never been afraid of anybody in my life.
Right.
And in fact, the bigger they are and the more bullying they are, the more I'll take them on.
But I'm curious to know, because it sounds like this is Sackville Place, wasn't it? And it just sounds like a great kind of environment to grow up in, great kind of inspiration to just be your own person and not be afraid. As a kid, was there a point where you were aware of the fact that this was like not a gesture, but you were actually stepping outside the lines, and you were kind of cutting outside the box and all
in
that?
school you became acutely aware of it because one, I wasn't afraid in school. A lot of the kids who were in my class in school were really afraid of the teachers, particularly the Christian brothers, the tough Christian brothers. And I remember kids being taken to Artane. Like if you misbehaved, didn't go to school, were mitching, truancy, maybe in trouble, stealing, and the cops came around and you went into that children's court system, friends of mine ended up in Artane. But I never had any fear of ending up in Artane, because at home in our house we were encouraged to be good at school, get involved, do the homework, do the exercises. My dad was very, very keen on reading, writing, theatre, plays, all that kind of stuff. So we were completely unafraid. Jim and myself and my brother John, we had no fear around teachers. Like, there was no teachers that intimidated me. In fact, I stood up to the toughest Christian brother in Lawrence O'Toole School. Was a fella called Mitchell. He was a headbanger. And I stood up to him once and asked him what he had against soccer. He nearly passed out on the spot. He nearly fainted on the spot. He threw me out of school. I was mitching for about 2 weeks.
Right.
And then one of the other teachers in the school caught me on the street and said, "You just need to apologise."
Right.
With the wink, in I went and said, "I'm sorry, brother, for asking you what you had against soccer. Sit down there, you, and keep your mouth shut." So like these were like scenes out of movies when I was a kid. They were like scenes out of plays or books. Standing up to a teacher, taking on authority with the backing and the consent of my father and my mother. And so that was the kind of family that we grew up in. be not afraid.
But that followed through with both yourself and Jim in the Project Art Centre from 76 to 1980. You were very much of the anti-establishment idea that, you know, the idea you had to dress up and all that. As you say yourself, fuck that. You just weren't going to sort of play by the old rules, and the idea that somebody who, you know, almost shouldn't be there could be there and could make this work. I mean, was that something that you can still feel in your gut? Because being anti-establishment is probably harder when you are kind of accepted as part of the establishment, when you are kind of, you know, success.
We never felt part of the establishment,
right?
Jim and I never felt part of it. But in a way, we didn't either feel disembarked from the establishment either. We just didn't have a concern. Right. Our concern was a kind of a social thing. You know, like the people I was attracted to, drawn to in the mid-70s, Mannix Flynn,
right,
wrote the play The Liberty Suit based on his time in jail. Completely drawn to that story because it was like an extension of school to me. My friends ended up in Artane. Here was another guy who ended up in jail. He just happened to be from Mercer Street, from York Street. You know, we got him in, and look, he had an energy in the mid-70s, an acting energy that was like nobody else in the town had it. Right. But he had it. He had this burning rage. It was like a James Cagney thing. He was almost like a modern day James Cagney figure who was like burning with a rage, an internal rage. We wanted to put that on the stage. Jim and I were just immediately drawn to that. That's what we're about. We want to put that up there and give that a voice and let that happen. And we did. And we you know, the play became probably the most famous play that we ever did, yeah. the Liberty Suit. And in fact, it was so big that we had to do it in the Olympia. And we gambled the entire Arts Council subsidy we had for that year on the show going into the Olympia. Had it failed, we would have been turfed out. But as it happened, it worked. But then when we did Gay Sweatshop, you know, I'd seen Gay Sweatshop in London and brought them over here, you know, and it was the great issue of the day, you know, homosexuality, the criminalisation of it, the decriminalisation of it, that whole issue. We weren't gay, Jim and I, the last thing we were was very heterosexual men. But we found allies in the gay movement, and we hosted the Gay Sweatshop thing, and that caused an absolute storm. We had our grant withdrawn. We had to fight that issue. You know, so when you talk about the establishment, that was our connection to the establishment, was taking them on to get our money back, you know. But after 5 years of it, we were pretty spent, you know.
Right.
I mean, it was 5 years of utter and complete madness. Because as well as the theatre thing, we were doing music. We did a lot of music between 75 and 80. Right. A lot of music. I mean, we hosted music every Friday and Saturday night. If it wasn't U2, it was Christy Moore, it was Scullion, it was Freddie White, it was all of those people at that time, Donald Lundy, Andy Irvine. I mean, project was really happening, and we had a cinema. We were showing the films of Jean-Luc Godard. We were showing Ingrid Bergman films. You know, we were really hopping in the project. It was the energy source of the town. It was the lifeblood. That's where people went to plug in. And then, of course, we did a big punk celebration called 24 Hours Dark Space in 1978, where we had a 36-hour non-stop concert in a celebration of.
But I'm always fascinated by when you follow an artist, and whether it's Bowie or anyone, that idea that you're going to have, you know, a fire in the belly, and naturally, as we all do, we kind of, you know, there's other sensations come in, other parts of the world kick into us, and we start to readjust our set. But you know, the work still stands, the sense of who they are still stands. For you and Jim, and especially for you, I guess, you know, when you walk away from the Project Art Centre, I don't know whether there would be like moments of doubt, whether there's a sense of where do I go, what do I do with this, or.
Well, for me, I mean, it's really interesting the two directions we went in. Right. Jim went to New York because Dublin was just too small for him. He didn't buy it anymore, and he was interested in film, and he wanted to go to the place where kind of film was possible. It wasn't really possible in Ireland in the early 80s, except on a very, very small scale. And I stayed here, and my decision was, you know what, I've worked with the professional actors now for 5 or 6 years. I've done shows about the kinds of issues that interest me. Now I'm actually going to work with people who have no experience of acting. Right. So I took on a community theatre thing, and I did that for 3-4 years in the North Inner City, and I had the best time of my life. And in fact, I wrote a book called Break a Leg, which is largely about that time in the North Inner City. You know, and I connected into people like Tony Gregory, and Tony got elected, and we were talking to Haughey, and Haughey was coming up to our offices in Summerhill Parade, and we were negotiating a cultural policy with them. I mean, this was really exciting stuff for me, you know, breaking down the perceptions of how art could happen. And I worked with people basically off the street. Some of them, the women were absolutely amazing. They were utterly astonishing. There were 2 women in the group that I had, a drama group. One of them had 6 kids and the other one had 5.
Wow.
And here they were acting for the first time in their lives and being brilliant and realising themselves, Jean Doyle and Florrie Cunningham particularly. You know, amazing women who stayed and became lifelong friends, and people I worked with over and over again over the years. I loved that kind of work. I loved the whole idea, going back to kind of my father's thing of give people an opportunity. Talent is not a thing that comes with going to university.
Right.
Talent is a thing that people have. You know, it's a form of expression. And certainly Dublin working class people have that in abundance. And I've always been drawn to tapping into that energy source and putting that up there and giving it its voice, because that's the one that really interests me. I'm not so much interested in the middle class stuff.
The shift for you from football to theatre and to art and all that, I think you were the first kid on your street to go to Trinity. There was a sense that you kids from your street shouldn't be allowed, or almost to go to university. I mean, was there a kind of a switch that went on in regard to turning to art, or was it just an organic thing that sort of naturally was in the
organic thing?
You're right.
I mean the thing of school, as I said to you, both my parents were, so positive towards education. You know, it wasn't an accident that we went to college. Jim went to college at the same time as me, except he did a night degree, and I was doing a day degree in Trinity. He was doing a night degree in UCD. And I remember we used to compare notes because we shared a bed, Jim and I. We had lodgers in the house, so it was always, bed space was very tight in our house, and very often it was Jim, myself and John in the double bed, 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom, and then a couple of lodgers round about the room as well, madzers,
Yeah.
And in the kind of way they paid for the education. But I always remember Jim, when he discovered Samuel Beckett, sitting up in the bed saying, Peter, listen to this, this is brilliant. The Times literary supplement is admirably adapted to my purposes of a never-failing impermeability. Even farts make no impression on it. One day I counted them, 618 farts in 19 hours. After all, it's not excessive. It's not even 1 fart every 4 minutes. Jesus, it's unbelievable. Damn it, man, I hardly fart at all. And me being blown away by this, figure, who I vaguely heard of, Waiting for Godot, knew he was from Dublin, lived in Paris, wrote in French. And then we discovered Beckett, and it was like we were off on a whole other journey. And Jim wrote a wonderful piece on Beckett called Unless It Goes On Beyond the Grave in 1970-71, when he was studying at college. Vinnie McKay performed it and I directed it in the old Project Art Centre in Middle Abbey Street there, just opposite the Peacock Theatre. And it was like, I was what? I was 20. I was directing a one-man show on Samuel Beckett. Like, what a pup I was.
Well, we should, of course, we can't not mention the great Brendan Behan. He lived around on Russell Street, not far from you. Was there an acknowledgement as a kid, or did it come in teenage years that the work itself started to kick in, that you realised, this is doable, people can do this?
Two things about Brendan Behan. I remember seeing Borstal Boy in the Abbey Theatre in 1967.
Right.
That was the stage adaptation.
I think the first time it was up on stage or something.
Right. 67, 10 years after the book was published.
Right.
And it was Frank Grimes playing the young Behan and Neil Tobin playing the older Behan. And I'd never seen anything like this in my life. The idea of putting a guy up there representing a 16-year-old boy who went to England basically on a solo mission to bomb them into submission.
Yeah.
I was just in love with this guy. Who is this guy? I want to know more about this fella. And there were bombs, explosions going off on stage, and there were scenes where he got beaten up by prison warders but came back from more fighting, standing up. He gives the priest a lecture, and I always remember that lecture he gives the priest, where the priest is saying to him, "You're not going to leave this murder gang, the IRA. The IRA is not a murder gang, Father." Yes, they are, and the bishops of England have said they're a murder gang. Well, I'm not going to take lessons in Irish history from the bishops of England, Father. And he makes this speech that is just absolutely jaw-droppingly informed. He's like a university professor dressing down an ignorant English priest, and he gives them this lecture, and the audience were cheering at the end of it in the Abbey Theatre. It's like I was going, oh my God, what's this? Who is this person? and the following year I saw a production of The Hostage in the old embankment out in Tala.
Wow. Run
by a guy called Mick McCarthy from the Stole. And Mick used to have theatre on out there. And I remember Jim, my brother, bringing me out. I was 16, on the bus out to the embankment to see this play set in a brothel, where they're holding an English soldier hostage against a man in Belfast jail who's going to be hung. I mean, this was just, for me, I didn't think the theatre could deal with that kind of subject matter, but Behan was dealing with it. So from then on, I was just totally enamoured of Behan, and everything about him. And then obviously, as I grew older, I became more and more informed about his journey and the madness of it and the contradictions of it. You know, there was great sides to Brendan. There were really frustrating sides to him as well. I'd say he was a bore.
Yeah.
You know, especially when he was drunk and stuff. I'd say
that's the important thing to remember always with iconic characters. Of course, they were real, and they had their down moments and they had their bad sides. And I mean, there's Shane MacGowan. He's going to be celebrated at the National Concert Hall. I mean, beautiful man, but you know, he without, I'm sure his own admission, he's had difficulties beyond belief.
Totally. And I mean, the comparisons with Behan and Shane are, except Shane lived much longer.
Yeah,
you know, people still go, Shane MacGowan is still alive.
I think he's gone to Keith Richards' doctor somewhere in Switzerland. I don't know what's going on there.
You know, David Bowie is gone. Philip Chevron is gone.
Yeah.
You know,
I guess
Joe
it's an
Strummer
age thing,
but
it just seems, and maybe the internet is sort of gives us much more information, and it feels like a lot more. But it certainly seems there's periods of time there where it seemed almost weekly. Somebody from part of the jigsaw puzzle fell off. That was part of your life. Now we should say that with Behan especially, he sort of weaved into your life a lot, and obviously the confirmation suit, written 2 years before he died.
It wasn't.
Was it?
It wasn't. I thought that was a mistake I made for years. The thing with the confirmation suit was it was republished in 1962 by Ireland's Own magazine, which was a big magazine at that time.
And
a lot of people discovered the story through that republication. But in fact, the story had been written in 1953.
Gotcha. All right.
It was written in 53.
Well, he wrote about his 12-year-old self, and you know, just the idea. Well, he was writing about the fact that he wanted this.
Interestingly, the story is actually based on his brother.
There we go.
There we go. And like all good writers, he knew a good story when he had it, and he stole it from the brother, and wrote it, and made himself the central character of the story. And it's a wonderful coming of age story.
And you've the great Gary Cook now. He's done Behan for you before. He's got the voice. He's got the skill. He's got the belly. He's got the whole.
He has the whole thing going. No, he has that thing, you know.
But they say a great artist brings a certain amount of themselves to any work, even if it's an adaptation. And is that true for you? Do you find yourself you're naturally going to, you know, have a take on this? You know? And
of course. I mean, I'm drawn to the story for all sorts of reasons. I'm drawn to the story because I stood up to the Christian brother in school. I said, what have you got against soccer, brother? And Brendan had to, in a way, kind of stand up to the mother. You know, the big confrontation in that story is with the mother. You know, over the fact that Brendan wears the suit. Very dangerous. Wears the suit for 10 minutes every Sunday, goes up to Miss McCann and comes back down and takes it off. And the mother saying, you're a hypocrite, you're a hypocrite. And she goes up and supposedly tells Miss McCann that Brendan's been cheating on her. That he's only been wearing the suit for 10 minutes every Sunday. He doesn't wear it out on the street. He always wears an overcoat when he has the suit on. So Brendan, in a way, that's his coming of age. His coming of age is this suit. And the fact that he has to come to terms with the fact that maybe it was his decision that killed the woman in the end. She died of a broken heart. Because she loved him so much. You know, I mean, it's just wonderfully rich stuff.
But do you find that for your own stories? I mean, you've had 3 memoirs out, and I know Made in Dublin is based on 44 Dublin Made Me. There's a little bit that idea that you're kind of also, you know, dealing with what is ultimately who you are now and what informed you and all that. Does it tend to be difficult at times to do that? Is it a joy? Is it therapeutic?
Look, there are always difficult subject matters that you come to. If you're writing from where I'm coming from, which is writing about yourself, your family, your background, your parish, your school, when it really comes to shining the light on your own self, you know, then it becomes, ooh, can I really go there? There are other people involved here. There's a wife and there's children and there's my legacy and you know, how much of the, like I stopped drinking in 1989. I was 37. Brendan lived to 41, so I stopped. I should have stopped earlier. But when I stopped, I really needed to stop. So it gave me a view on Brendan's alcoholism, I think. And even though I love Brendan, it's very frustrating that he couldn't get the message. It's kind of a George Best story as well. That same thing of just people who literally cannot find it in themselves to stop doing the thing that's killing them, poisoning them. You know, it's a very sad story, you know, and alcoholism is such a disease. You know, it really, it is that thing that tells you don't have it, you know. And
is there a struggle, you know, when it comes to writing these stories that you know, you don't want to go John Hind or Bord Falcher, you don't want to go necessarily down Angela Ashes. There's certain ways to kind of put the story out there that's either going to be very kind of emotive and sort of crowd pleasing, and other times it's going to be the darker version where you really want to go down there and explore genuinely what it felt. Is that an issue, or does it just come out the way it comes out?
You know, I did a 12-step program on my drinking. I found that fantastic.
Right.
I found that I don't know that you could do it any other way, other than meeting with other people and talking about it, and just getting honest about it. I mean, it's the honesty thing that's really difficult.
Right.
You know, nobody who's a drunk, nobody who's an alcoholic is having a good time. That's a myth.
Okay.
Yeah, stories, great war stories. Look, some of the great drunks have great stories, but there has to be a huge aspect to it that's anything but funny. And certainly the impact that it has on those around you is horrific. You know, horrific. It had a horrific impact on my family, and I had to get clean about that and honest about that and try and make reparation. You know, try and make it up to people that I'd hurt, you know. There is a long list of people that you hurt along the way, you know, and you need to square that circle when you get sober and make it up to some of those people, you know. And that, I think, frightens a lot of people away from that journey. I'm sure for Brendan, like Brendan's thing was he was a mess, you know. Right. He didn't know if he was gay or straight. He didn't know if he was a Republican anymore. Like, he just got lost in that fog of, you know, so at the end he was just a contradictory. Those final interviews of him, there's a famous one outside the College of Music in Chatham Street, where he's talking about capital punishment. They're just about to enact a law to make capital punishment illegal in Ireland, and he's talking about the Minister for Justice, and he has a good heart and an Irish heart, and you're looking at this man and it's like terrifying to think that, like, even 6 years earlier this guy was the most sought after guest on American talk show television. He was the #1 guest. He was the guy everybody wanted to have on their program.
Sure, Ginsburg, everybody was
but it went bad. Yeah. You know, it went sour, and then everybody avoided him. And then the last person they wanted on their show was a drunk Brendan Behan who you couldn't understand what he was saying, and all he wanted to do was sing and interrupt everybody else and curse at people. And it became a bore. It became like, Brendan, stop. And
it just seems that you get locked into where every conversation is 4 o'clock in the morning, really, in their head, and they haven't slept well, and they really want to put an exclamation mark at the end of every sentence. There's no kind of just soft.
So Brendan went from that kid I saw on the Abbey stage, giving the lecture to the priest, the brilliant lecture about Irish history, that's full of insight and understanding and knowledge. And it's just magnificent that a kid could be carrying that knowledge in his head, and you want to cheer, and now you want to boo him because he won't stop talking. I mean, that's what he went to in a very, a relatively short period of time. So at his best, lovable, wonderful, I adore him. Yeah. And the alcoholic side of him, the addictive side of him, I just...
there's so many Elvis, George West, everybody, there's that sort of fog that kicks in, and they're just yes men, and that's all they have around them, and it becomes sad. Now, I should sort of, what the kind of question was really about the fact of for you, when it comes to your own work and dipping into your own life for the memoirs and for something like Made in Dublin. I mean, is there a kind of a part of you as a showman that wants to say put on a good show, and then there's also a part of you who wants to be a poet, that you want to go down the rabbit hole and let people...
I want to put on a good show. Right. I want to have the best gags of anybody in any show in Dublin. I want to have the great fun stories, genuinely funny stories, usually based on things that happen. You know, the stuff that happens that you can't make up. A lot of which I include in my material, you know. Like when I did that drama, that community drama, I mean, stuff happened in that drama group that you could not invent. It was so outside of one's remit. When the first day I brought this group of people together, and I made a very quick decision, I had 6 men and 6 women, right? None of them with any experience. I said, we're going to do a play in 3 weeks, a 30-minute play. Cinderella, Aladdin, do bleeding Aladdin. This discussion about what play we were going to. No, we're going to do a play about you, yourself, us. Play about bleeding us? Yeah, play about bleeding us. Sure, what would that be? I said, you tell me, what have you been doing? All I've been doing is bleeding trouble with the law. I said, well, let's do that. What? Let's do trouble with the law. And it became the first show that we did. Right. Set in court, District Court number 4. And I sent them down there to just spend a couple of days absorbing and the whole thing. And there's a very, very famous story about District Court number 4 in 1982 when a German sailor was up on a drunken disorderly charge in front of Justice O'Huey. The famous Justice O'Huey was the most famous District Court justice. A complete lunatic, let it be said. But anyway, this guy was up and he'd no English. And they're all sitting in the court, and the group, my drama group, are sitting there watching this, right? And O'Huey says, is anybody with German here? A little outlaw from the inner city puts the hand up, you know. O'Huey calls him up. Ask that man where he's from and what he works at. Where are you from and what do you work at?
That's pretty good.
He got 6 months. We gave him 6 months. So, nice. You know, they brought that story back to me, and I mean, it was all around Dublin. The following day, it was, you know, you couldn't use it, like it was gone. But I'm just saying, the stuff that happens in this town, you know, the stuff you couldn't make up, and there were so many brilliant things happened. Like, I don't even use this in Dublin Maiden, but we were sitting around. I wanted to do a play on the Monto, the famous red light district from Gloucester Street, Montgomery Street, and I was looking for a sort of a story to hang the whole thing on. And one of the participants, Jean Doyle, she was a woman with 5 kids, says, I don't know if this is any good, Peter, but me grandfather Christy, he fought in the First World War and he lived in the Monto. I said, that's a good start, he lived in the Monto. And I said, yeah. And he went out to fight the British Army, took the King's Shilling and all he did. He went out and he had his eye blown out at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. And he came back and he wouldn't go out, you know, because he'd no eye. And he was waiting on a glass eye to arrive. And when it came, it was the wrong colour. So he wrote back to them and said, could you send me the right colour? And he described it. He says, 5 eyes they sent them before he got the right colour. I said, this is not true. Oh, she said, I have it here. And out of her handbag, she took a brown box, out of which she took her grandfather's glass eye.
Holy moly.
And held her up for the group to see. And she says to me, is that any good, Peter, of a story? Any good of a story? Like,
I think everybody's got a great story if they realise it, just
like,
look around.
You know, there was a gem of a story. And that became the centrepiece of the play that we did. It was absolutely a stunning story. It was on the Behan level of the confirmation suit. It was like pure Dublin. You know, you got everything there. You've got the guy going to the war, British Army, coming back, 1916 has happened. He's in an apartment, he can't leave because he's no eye. He gets an eye, he goes out. The world that he left is gone. Ireland is now a free state. What does he do? He's lost. People throw tomatoes at him because he's wearing a British Army uniform. I mean, you couldn't make this up. This happened in our city, in our town. This man existed, Christy Costello. And then the very area that he's living in, full of prostitution, is closed down by an organisation called the Legion of Mary.
Boom.
I mean, if you wrote this in a Hollywood script and saying, that didn't happen. And you say, no, this happened. This happened in my town.
Now, we should mention, we'll wrap up with these two, the fact that the Sheridan name has had huge success in Dublin, but then around the world, and wonderful movies, and as I said, like your own son and Jim's children and all that. Is it a kind of a family thing to compare notes, to lick wounds, to talk about successes and failures? And because Jim's had a hard time now the last few years, and things haven't, film-wise, things haven't worked out for him, and he's had to back away from projects and disown. Does that become like a kind of part of the family conversation, or is it left to...
Well, Jim and I has an expression for us, for me and him, which is that we're both dipping into the same well.
Okay.
And that's a kind of a thing that can be difficult sometimes.
Sure.
Because sometimes
he takes the ink that you wanted to use. And
well, suddenly I'll read a script and I go, "Sure, you can't use that story." Well, oh, Jesus, Peter, I'm sorry. No, you can't use that story. That's my story, and I'm protective of that one. You can use everything else, but that one, no, that you can't. No, that's all right. So there's sensitivities around all of that, and similarly, even with my son Fecker, like I've been wanting to do a film based on The Runners, his book, for years. Couldn't get any backing from the Irish Film Board, much to my disappointment.
Sure.
And I'm now actually currently working on a kind of a stage adaptation of it. But with the stage adaptation, I'm taking it much further away from the book.
Right.
I just showed him a draft of the first act, and he had fantastic notes on it. My son.
All right.
You know, so I love that. I love the fact that the stories, the history, the legacy, it is a shared thing amongst us. We kind of bounce off each other, and you know, the stories are there to be worked on. And just like Behan steals his brother's story,
right?
You know, Jim's taking stories of mine, and you know, there's scenes in films that are completely me, that Jim has done, and vice versa. I've stolen things from Jim,
right,
and used in my work that would be completely Jim Sheridan stories, you know, that he has told me over the years. So we do, but there are sensitivities around that as well. You have to be careful that you don't step on somebody's creative toes or steal something that they feel really, really strongly about.
I suppose the final thing is, given all the success, and you think of the Project Art Centre, you think you won the Rooney Prize for Literature, you got the Breakfast one, your short film won a bunch of European awards, you wrote the first, I think, episode of Fair City. Yeah, there's been a load of different moments in your life, but I don't know, and hopefully the internet hasn't lied to me, but you're on Countdown.
I was this year.
So, is that the high point of your life so far?
Without question. There's no question in my mind that my Countdown appearance was the highlight of
How the hell does that happen?
I'll tell you how it happened. It's very simple. Myself and Sheila are huge Countdown fans.
Right.
And we've had this tradition over the years that we record Countdown because I'm usually out or working or she's out working. And we watch Countdown while we have our dinner.
Nice.
And we compete with each other on the Countdown thing. And Sheila for years has been saying to me, Peter, you're so good at Countdown. You really, really need to go on it. You're fantastic at it. She's also quite good.
Great.
So I said, if you fill in the forms, I'll go on. And behind my back, she got the forms, filled them all in and said, I've something for you to sign. I said, what's that? She said, have a look at it. I said, Countdown. She said, Countdown. So I signed the forms, and the two of us went over. We had a great 2 days in Manchester. I came up against a fantastic contestant in my very first match. He was a dinger. He actually reached the final, and I was just barely beating the final. But he was a fantastic contestant, and he beat me. I did well.
I was only brain freeze, because I think there's a sort of part of all of us that you know, you love music, you love whatever it might be, and then in the moment on stage it suddenly doesn't come to you.
Look.
Yeah.
You know, this guy was better than me.
Okay.
That's the simple answer to it. I'm a decent Countdown player, but this guy was top notch.
Right.
Yeah, right. Kind of not even nerdy, but just a top notch player. Lovely man. Moose, his name was. Welsh guy. He was fantastic. But I mean, so most days I'd watch Countdown, I'd beat the contestants hands down. But it is different when you're there. That there are nerves. I missed a numbers game that I normally would have got with my eyes closed.
Right.
And I was shocked that I didn't get it. I was genuinely, how did I not get that? And it was down to nerves.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But I think it's amazing too in situations where, you know, you're walking on a foot that's a wall that's only a foot off the ground. Suddenly you're on a wall that's 10 foot off the ground. It's a very different walk. Like you just suddenly kind of frightens you.
That's exactly it.
Well, listen, we look forward to the confirmation suit is this weekend. Yeah. We'll have this up today, and then you're coming back yourself with your own show, and hopefully we'll see quite a lot of you out in sunny Greystones.
Dublin Made Me is a lovely. It's one of my lighter shows.
Right.
It's kind of really based on that thing of Dublin humour and the funny things that happened in drama, things that I did, and in family stuff as well. And it's a homage to my parents.
Any nudity in it?
No, but I could work that in for Greystones.
We'll talk about that.